Imagine sitting in front of your TV on a quiet Thursday night, watching a show that had made you laugh for years. The jokes were familiar, the characters felt like old friends, and everything seemed perfectly fine. Then one morning you woke up and turned on the news, and the show was gone. Not cancelled the normal way. Not quietly retired. It was ripped off the air in a moment so explosive, so ugly, and so public that Hollywood has never quite seen anything like it before or since. What happened to 2.5 Men was not a slow decline. It was a single scene, a single breaking point, that ended everything. And once you understand what really went on behind those studio doors, you will never look at that show the same way again. 2.5 Men debuted on CBS in September 2003 and almost immediately became something special. The premise was simple enough. A wealthy, carefree jingle writer named Charlie Harper lived in a gorgeous Malibu beach house, drank too much, charmed every woman he met, and answered to absolutely nobody. Then his uptight, divorced chiropractor brother Alan showed up with his young son Jake, and suddenly Charlie's perfect bachelor life was turned completely upside down. Audiences loved it from the very first episode. Critics called it predictable and crude, but regular viewers could not get enough. By its third season, it had over 16 million people tuning in every single week, and its 30-second advertising slots was selling for over $400,000 each. It was a machine. A perfectly oiled, enormously profitable television machine. And right at the center of that machine was one man who would eventually become both its greatest strength and its most devastating weakness. Charlie Sheen was not just playing a character on that show. He was living one. His real-life personality, the charm, the recklessness, the absolute refusal to follow anyone's rules, matched Charlie Harper so closely that the line between actor and role almost completely disappeared. Audiences felt that. They sensed the authenticity in every scene, every smack, every careless shrug. It did not feel like acting because for Sheen, it barely was. By 2010, he had become the highest-paid actor on television, earning $825,000 per episode. But when contract renewal time came around, Sheen decided that number was nowhere near enough for what he was bringing to the table. He demanded $2 million per episode. The network was stunned. Negotiations stretched on for weeks, bleeding into late nights and tense phone calls and meetings that went absolutely nowhere. In the end, Sheen got close to what he wanted, locking in nearly $2 million per episode in a deal that shattered every record in television history. He was untouchable. Or at least, that is what everyone around him allowed him to believe. But here is the thing about a man who truly believes he is untouchable. He stops being careful. He stops watching his words, managing his behavior, or thinking even for a moment about consequences. And that is exactly what began to happen with Charlie Sheen in the years following that record-breaking deal. The warning signs had been there long before any of this. Back in 1998, he had overdosed on cocaine and entered rehab for the very first time. On Christmas Day in 2009, he was arrested for attacking his wife Brooke Mueller and quietly went through rehab once again. In October 2010, he trashed a hotel room in New York City while drunk and naked, causing thousands of dollars in damage and making headlines he could not control. Each time something happened, the studio looked the other way because the show was too valuable, the ratings too high, and Sheen too irreplaceable to touch. They kept paying him, kept protecting him, and kept pretending everything behind those cameras was perfectly fine. And Sheen took that silence as permission to keep pushing further. Behind the scenes during Season 7, things had deteriorated to a degree that would have ended any other actor's career immediately. Sheen would show up to the set visibly drunk, unable to stand without leaning on furniture, stumbling through scenes he had filmed dozens of times before without a second thought. He forgot his lines constantly, forcing writers to scramble in real time and reassign his dialogue to other cast members on the spot just to keep filming moving forward. He fought openly and bitterly with the show's creator Chuck Lorre, insulting the writing in front of the entire cast and crew, and on more than one occasion physically ripping scripts apart and demanding rewrites before anyone could even read what was on the page. The atmosphere on set became suffocating. People who had worked on the show for years were walking on eggshells every single day, never knowing which version of Sheen was going to walk through that door. The cast felt it. The writers felt it. The crew felt it in every long, exhausting hour they spent on that soundstage. But nobody said anything publicly because the money kept coming in, the ratings were still strong, and nobody wanted to be the person who finally blew it all up. Then in January 2011, CBS and Warner Brothers made a decision they had been avoiding for far too long. They halted production on the show entirely and told Sheen he needed to enter rehab immediately. It was a bold move and an extraordinarily expensive one, but it was meant to be a quiet intervention. A private moment where Sheen could get the help he so clearly needed and where everyone could quietly reset and move forward together. But Sheen did not quietly check into a facility and disappear from the headlines. Instead, he threw a 36-hour party filled with drugs and absolute chaos that ended with him being rushed to the hospital in the middle of the night. Even from his hospital bed, he told reporters he was perfectly fine. He claimed he had healed himself using only the power of his own mind. He looked into cameras with complete and unnerving sincerity and said he had simply closed his eyes and made it so. The world watched in stunned disbelief and could not look away. What followed over the next several weeks was one of the most bizarre and unsettling public meltdowns in the entire history of the entertainment industry. Sheen began giving interviews daily, sometimes multiple times in a single day, on every platform that would have him. He bragged openly and gleefully about his drug use. He called himself a warlock. He announced to anyone who would listen that he had tiger blood and Adonis DNA running through his veins, as though he were a completely different and superior species from everyone around him. He claimed he was not from this planet. He said that if anyone else tried to live the way he lived, they would simply die, because ordinary people were not built the way he was built. The catchphrases spread everywhere almost instantly. Tiger blood, winning, Adonis DNA. They went viral across every corner of the internet, turning his very public breakdown into a strange and darkly compelling form of entertainment that millions of people could not stop consuming. On March 1, 2011, Sheen joined Twitter and gained 1 million followers in a single day, shattering every record the platform had ever seen. The world was watching a man unravel in real time, and somehow, horrifyingly, they could not stop clicking. But behind all those viral moments and outrageous catchphrases, there was something far more serious and far more personal happening beneath the surface. There was a war being fought between Charlie Sheen and Chuck Lorre that had been quietly building for years and was now detonating in front of the entire world. Lorre was a disciplined, methodical architect of the show, a man who had spent years carefully crafting stories, managing enormous egos, and keeping an incredibly complex production running smoothly against all odds. Sheen had always deeply resented being told what to do, always chafed against structure and authority in any form, and Lorre had always believed in discipline and creative control above everything else. The two men had been oil and water from the very beginning, but as long as the ratings stayed enormous, they found uneasy ways to coexist. Now there was nothing left to hold them together, and no reason for either man to pretend otherwise. During a radio interview in February 2011, Sheen said things about Chuck Lorre that crossed every professional and personal line that existed. He called him a maggot. He used Lorre's Hebrew name in a way that many people immediately recognized as deeply offensive and anti-Semitic. He said Lorre was beneath him in every possible way. He mocked him personally, professionally, and publicly in a sustained attack that went far beyond simple frustration or creative disagreement. This was not just a man venting after a bad week on set. This was something that had been building for years, finally pouring out with no filter and absolutely no concern for what came next. Chuck Lorre, a man who had always chosen his battles carefully and stayed out of the public eye, had reached the end of everything he was willing to tolerate. And this time, the full weight of the studio stood directly behind him. On March 7, 2011, Warner Brothers fired Charlie Sheen from 2.5 Men. The announcement landed on Hollywood like a thunderclap that nobody had quite believed was actually coming. This was the highest paid actor on television, the man the entire show had been built around and shaped to fit. The reason 16 million people still tuned in every single week despite everything. And they fired him anyway. The studio sent Sheen an 11-page letter outlining every incident, every act of dangerous misconduct, every moment of destructive and erratic behavior that had accumulated over years of looking the other way. They said he had insulted the show's creator repeatedly and publicly in ways that made continued collaboration impossible. They said he appeared to be seriously and genuinely ill. They said his behavior had become a direct threat not only to himself but to every single person working around him. And they said that enough was finally enough. The firing immediately affected over 200 people who depended on the show for their livelihoods and wiped out 8 episodes, costing an estimated $10 million in lost production alone. It was a rare and stunning moment in television history when a major studio chose to stand by its principles rather than protect its profits at any cost. Sheen responded 3 days later by filing a lawsuit against Warner Brothers and Chuck Lorre for $100 million. He claimed they had no right to remove him and insisted he was ready and willing to keep working as though nothing had happened. His lawyers argued the studio had unfairly scapegoated their client for problems that were never entirely his responsibility alone. The legal battle dragged through the courts for months before finally reaching a settlement in September 2011. The exact terms were never disclosed publicly, but those close to the negotiations estimated that she may have walked away with up to $125 million. Including back pay and a percentage of the show's enormously valuable rerun profits. Even in the wreckage of everything he had destroyed, the numbers were almost incomprehensible. But no settlement, no matter how large, could give him back what he had truly lost, and on some level everyone watching from the outside understood that. CBS now had a massive and very public problem on its hands. They had one of the most successful shows in television history, with no star to anchor it. Replacing someone as iconic and as deeply embedded in a show's identity as Charlie Sheen felt almost impossible to most people in the industry. At one point Hugh Grant was reportedly very close to signing on, with an offer of $1 million per episode on the table and talks progressing well. Then on May 10th Grant suddenly and unexpectedly walked away, citing creative disagreements, throwing the network straight back into panic with their advertiser presentation just days away and still no replacement in sight. Then a name came up that genuinely surprised almost everyone paying attention. Ashton Kutcher. The deal came together with remarkable speed. Kutcher signed a contract worth $20 million for a single season of 26 episodes. On September 19, 2011, his new character Walden Schmidt made his debut in an episode watched by over 28 million people, nearly double the show's regular audience. Pure curiosity drove millions of viewers back to their screens just to see how the impossible had been handled. The episode opened with Charlie Harper's funeral, where it was quietly revealed that he had died in Paris after being struck by a train. The message from the writers and from Lorre personally could not have been clearer. Charlie Harper was gone. This painful chapter was now firmly closed, and everyone involved was determined to move forward no matter what it took. The show continued for 4 more seasons and came to its end in February 2015, with a finale watched by over 13 million viewers. The final scene, the one that still gets discussed and debated wherever television fans gather, showed a figure dressed and styled to look almost exactly like Charlie Harper walking slowly up to the beach house front door. Then without any warning a grand piano fell from the sky and crushed him completely. The camera then pulled back to reveal Chuck Lorre himself sitting calmly in a chair, staring directly into the lens, and saying the single word winning, Sheen's most notorious catchphrase, before a second piano dropped from above and crushed Lorre too. The entire sequence lasted just 15 seconds. It was savage, it was pointed, and it was deeply and unmistakably personal. Social media erupted with over 500,000 mentions in the days immediately following. Talk shows and entertainment programs spent days analyzing every frame of it. Even Sheen, watching everything from the outside, ultimately admitted the moment was in his own words silly but effective. Years later, with enough distance between himself and the smoking ruins of what had happened, Sheen began to genuinely reflect on the choices that had brought him there. In a candid and surprisingly honest interview on the 10th anniversary of his firing, he said there were 55 reasonable ways he could have handled the entire situation, and he had somehow managed to pick number 56. It was a quiet, almost devastating moment of self-awareness from a man who had spent years loudly insisting to the entire world that he was winning when everything around him was visibly falling apart. He admitted that his financial demands, his erratic behavior on set, and his catastrophic public meltdown had all been the product of addiction and unchecked ego working together in the most destructive possible combination. He had been the highest-paid actor in the history of American television, and he had burned every last piece of it to the ground in a matter of weeks. 2.5 Men ran for 12 full seasons, produced 262 episodes, and generated hundreds of millions of dollars for every person and company connected to it. It helped breathe new life into the traditional multi-camera sitcom format at a time when single-camera comedies were threatening to take over completely. It made genuine stars out of everyone it touched and became one of the defining cultural landmarks of early 2000s American television. And it was ended not by falling ratings, not by shifting network priorities, not by creative exhaustion, but by a single catastrophic breaking point between two men who had always been fundamentally incompatible and who finally ran out of reasons to pretend otherwise. That is the true story of Two and a Half Men. Not the laughs or the beach house or the theme song that is probably still somewhere in the back of your head right now. The real story is about what happens when extraordinary talent meets unchecked self-destruction, when ego finally grows too large for wisdom to survive alongside it, and when the people who have been quietly holding everything together finally decide they simply cannot hold on any longer. It is a story Hollywood keeps telling in different forms, with different faces, in different eras. But very few versions of it have ever been as dramatic, as public, as expensive, or as permanently unforgettable as this one. If this kind of honest, deep storytelling about the real lives and real moments behind your favorite classic television shows is what you have been looking for, then you are exactly where you belong. Hit that subscribe button right now, and make sure you never miss what we uncover next. There are stories just as powerful as this one waiting for you on this channel. And trust me, you do not want to be the last one to hear them.